Okay, apologies for that, just had some technical blip, so I'm just now going to hand over to James to run the webinar. Thank you. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Mike, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I thought what I'd do is just start, hopefully you can see the slides, I'll just start by showing you kind of what I'm hoping to cover this afternoon in the next 40-45 minutes. So, excuse me, I'll briefly introduce myself and kind of give you a bit of background on hopefully why I have something useful to share with you, and then take you through just, I guess my passion is really helping people to take a long-term view of business and of life, and then to translate that into day-to-day activity. So that's what I'm going to try and do with you over the next 40 minutes, is just think about how can you take those long-term plans and convert them into day-to-day stuff that's going to make a difference for your 2018. And the context for that is, as you can see, the kind of wider goals around life and business, and then bringing that down to the day-to-day stuff, and also thinking about how you can share that with, if you are, there's more than just you in the business, how you can share that with your colleagues in order to bring your team along with you. So I hope that'll be of use. I hope my voice holds up. I'm just on the way up from a cold, so I apologise in advance for any throat clearing as we go along, but hopefully that'll be okay. So just a bit of background on who I am. I've been a business coach for 15 years, and thanks to Mike for the introduction about the kind words he said about my reputation. But I'm based between Oxford and Reading, and I've been working with small businesses now for a decade and a half, and I do one-to-one coaching, I do training, I do a lot of development of management teams. I've written a couple of books on managing businesses. Prior to doing this, I worked for a large company, part of Severn Trent, a waste management company called Butler. I ran a small team there and a business that grew to about 9 million turnover. And until about this time last year, I had my own business that grew to about 10 people providing business coaching across the UK. I left that business last Christmas, and for the last 12 months, and currently I'm operating independently on my own, but still doing the same kind of work. And as part of that work, I've worked with a couple of the large business schools on management programs for owner-managers. So hopefully that's where I'm coming from in terms of the experience I've had, which doesn't make me an expert, but it hopefully makes me able to understand some of the challenges that you're facing or I'm facing as a small business owner. But for the real background, I think we need to go back to July 2009, and in terms of my personal background and what, if you like, what colours my approach to today's webinar and to my coaching life and my business life. July 2009, my wife had an operation, and she ended up in the intensive care unit after this operation, as she was kind of recovering from her surgery. And this is a symbol of a graph of kind of what optimum blood pressure would be. So you can see that the green zone is where you should be. The top number, as they read it out, should be about up to between 90 and 120, and the bottom number should be somewhere between 60 and 80. And this is where my wife was, literally just off the bottom of the graph. So I was there in the ICU room watching the blood pressure monitor and seeing what was going on, and obviously she was quite poorly, and realised that all the noise and things that I thought were important in life become actually quite unimportant in that context. And thankfully she was fine, she recovered, she had good medical care, but that was a real kind of watershed moment, and I realised that we had stared down the barrel of a gun and thankfully come out the other side. And so we decided as a couple that we were going to then live life much more intentionally, because it could have been snatched away from her, and obviously it would have been very different for me. So that meant we did different things in business, and it meant that we've done different things in life. So the other side of the background, I suppose, is this is a photograph of the harbour side in Juneau in Alaska, and you can see here the large sort of 3,000 berth cruise ships that take people around the Alaskan waterways and show them the glaciers and wildlife and all those kind of stuff. And if you look very, very closely at the bottom of this arrow, you'll see the boat that I went cruising on an activity cruise in September. So one of the things that we have done is written a bucket list and gone out and done them. So that was, my wife particularly wanted to go and do a couple of things in Alaska and Canada, so we did those. So this is us. My wife hates this photograph because that's her hair in the front, but that's us kayaking within a couple hundred yards of a calving glacier in Glacier Bay in Alaska. And this is just all context really to say business is really important, but life is just as more important. And then the other side of our trip was to go to see grizzly bears in the wild. So this is a photograph that my wife took. And the whole thing that she really wanted to do was to see grizzly bears eating salmon. So that's why we went in September, because that's the peak time to see salmon. But as you can see from this photograph, we were there, the grizzly bears were there, but the salmon were not. And I'll come back to this later in the webinar, but this is just an illustration of it. Sometimes you can have the best laid plans and they don't always fully come to realization because the salmon don't turn up. Okay, having said that, we still had an amazing experience, and obviously the same is true in business, that you can not quite go to plan but still have an amazing experience. So, to start with that, I guess what I want you to do is wake up and smell the coffee. Please don't wait for to have that kind of experience that I had with my wife of being in an ICU bed or whatever, but actually almost literally make a cup of coffee, sit down and start to think about what it is that you want from life, from your business, because there is a far greater likelihood that you'll achieve those things if you stop and think about what they are. So if you take nothing away from this afternoon, then please just give yourself permission to sit down with a cup of coffee, a blank piece of paper and a pen, and just start to sketch out what are the things that you want from your business and your wider life, and also think about how the business contributes to that wider life. So normally when I would do this talk on a flip chart, you would get to see the benefit of my fantastic artistic skills, but you're going to have to rely on PowerPoint now, so therefore I apologise for the rather GCSE art elements of this, but if you can imagine a horizon in the distance with a road heading towards it, and on that horizon there's this kind of beautiful sunset. Isn't that beautiful? So really for me, this metaphor extends into the business being, life being the horizon and that glorious sunshine, and your working life is then the road that's taken towards it, and business is the vehicle within which you travel. So therefore, really, particularly if you're running your own business, if you're taking all the risk and having all the heartache that comes with running your own business, then really it ought to be a vehicle that takes you to that destination that you have chosen, and in a manner in which you choose. And the glorious thing about having your own business is you get to design it. So therefore, if there's something good or bad about that business, that's down to you as an individual, which is the kind of power that we have as owner-managers of small businesses. So really the main framework for this is to stop and say, well, where is it I want to go? How quickly do I want to get there? What's the manner in which I want to travel? And the more that we stop and make those thoughts and articulate those, then the greater chance we have of getting there. In terms of a kind of practical way of thinking through that, the first step is to think about where is that horizon, and that is different for everyone. So think of a time scale that is relevant for you. So that could be a significant birthday, so when you're 40, 50, 60, 70. It could be when children leave home and you have different responsibilities or less commitments in terms of university fees or whatever it might be. It might be the year that you think you're going to be able to pay off your mortgage, whatever it is, or when your business is 10 years old, whatever it might be, to come up with a date that's relevant for you. Personally, I would recommend somewhere that's between 5 and 10 years away, because if it's less than 5 years, it's a bit too close to really make a big deal of difference, and if it's more than 10 years, it just seems too far away and untouchable. So somewhere between 5 and 10 years, but a date that's relevant to you. For many years, been able to talk about people having 2020 visions and thinking about 2020, but obviously that's now only scarily 2 years away in a month's time, and so that's probably a bit too close. And then, excuse me, once you know the timescale, it's then to think about what is it that you would want to be true by that date. So let us say it's the 1st of January 2025. What is it that you would want to be true by the 1st of 2025? And in one of the books I wrote, which I'll talk about later, we came up with 9 different areas of life that you might want to consider when thinking this through. So the first one is your career or your work. So this is obviously primarily the focus for today, but what is it that you want to be true within your business, either to have happened or to still be happening by that date? So what? How big do you want to be? How many employees do you want to be? How much profit do you want to be making? What markets do you want to be in? What products do you want to be selling? Those kind of things. What do you want to be true within your professional life by that date? Excuse me. The second category is community, and so that's just what do you want to be true in terms of where do you live, what part do you play within your community where you live, or other communities. Some people are involved in sports clubs, supporters clubs, churches. It could be anything, but what's that wider remit in your immediate family? But what do you want to be true within that kind of community basis? What is it that you would like to have learned? So are there qualifications that you would like to obtain, either for professional reasons or just for personal interest? So do you want to learn a language? Do you want to get a bookkeeping qualification? Do you want to have a master's or these kind of things? What do you want to be true in terms of your learning? Or it could just be, do you want to learn about the history of the Templars or something? It doesn't have to be academic. In terms of the environment, what is it you want to be true? That's not the environment as in global warming and acid rain and the like. It's more your personal environment. So where do you want to live? What do you want to be true about that place that you live? So do you want there to be it to be a certain type of house? Do you want it to be decorated in a certain way? Do you want the garden to be of a certain standard? Those kind of things. So again, it's an opportunity to think about what do you want to be true in your wider life. I've already talked about my trips to Alaska and Canada, and many of us have things that we like to do. So we want to see tigers in the wild, or we want to walk across Sydney Harbour Bridge, or whatever it might be. What are the things that you might want to do? And what, again, in a business context, it might be that your business can afford you the opportunity to do those things. So think about the things that you would like to experience. Very connected to business and very connected to Chapman, Robertson and Moore is the financial side of these things. So what do you want to be true in terms of your finances? Where do you want to be with your mortgage? Where do you want to be with your pension savings and your retirement planning? What contribution does the business need to be making, i.e. what do you need to be earning? What commitments might you have in terms of school fees or university tuition fees or the like, or paying for some of these experiences or education things that we've talked about. I haven't known anyone when I've been talking about this ever say that they wanted to be unhealthy, but obviously there might be specific goals that you might want to set around health, which might be the ability to run a distance or in a certain speed, or to play football with your kids, or all sorts of things. But what is it? Give up smoking? What goals might you want to set within that timescale for your health? Relationships is then the people who are closer to you. So that's normally kind of spouse, children, immediate family, siblings and parents, those kind of things. Again, you might have aspirations for certain things within those, and it's worth just including those within your plan. So do you want to be a good husband? Do you want to be a good parent? Do you want to have a better relationship with parents or siblings or so on? And then originally we only had 8, and then after a lot of feedback we introduced a 9th one, which is just to think about what it is you want to leave behind. So do you want your business to carry on when you're no longer involved? Do you want to have kind of charitable institutions? Do you want to have an impact on young people like children or so on? Just think about what kind of footprints you're going to be leaving from your time here. So the idea is that you would have your thought process of, by 2025 or whenever, what do I want to be true in these 9 areas? And what you'll probably see is that they will be interrelated. So the relationships one might have an impact on the experiences, because you might want to make sure that you're still married in order to go and see lions in the wild with your wife, for example. Or finance and career obviously are intricately linked, so therefore you'll see there's some interrelation. And then what I suggest you then do is think about the fact that the vehicle, your business, is the vehicle that allows you to get there. So therefore, once you know that path of life, which to me I think is far more important than the business thing, you can then design the business to afford you that life. And so therefore, you can be intentional about creating the right one. Because if you want to spend a lot of time in your community, then you might not want to work 80 hours a week. If you want to have a good relationship with your kids, you might not want to work 80 hours a week. But if you want to have an income of £100,000 a year, you might design the business differently than if you want an income of £20,000 a year. So just be intentional about it. So once you have that, by 2025, let's say, by the future thing, you can then sketch this thing out. This is just a graphic from the book. It's not rocket science, relatively easy to do. I would suggest you get a large sheet of flip chart paper or something like that. Draw out the ring, so you've got however many years it is to your future date, and then just pop post-it notes and say, this is what I want to be true on that future date. So and the reason for using post-it notes is that, in my experience, everybody moves them around eventually and says, oh, actually no, this needs to be slightly different or whatever. So by using post-it notes, you can be fairly free and easy and just move stuff around. And once you have, obviously, your current year, you'll know where you stand now in terms of your finances or your relationships or your health or or your business. You can then say, well, I know what my current year is and I know where I want to be in year 4 in this case, and so therefore I can just work backwards and say, well, in order to get to year 4, then these things need to be true in year 3, these things need to be true in year 2. Sorry, let's go back. And then you'd be able to fill in year 1 as well. So therefore you'd be able to work backwards from the future and say, these are the things that I need to be true. In my experience over the 15 years, it's far more stretching and therefore beneficial to start with the future and work back, rather than starting with the now and saying, well, what could be true next year and what could be true the year after. People tend to be more ambitious if they start with the long-term future and work backwards. So therefore, if you want to achieve more, then I would say, start with the future and work backwards. Obviously, once you have the post-it notes up, then you can again review those interdependencies. So whether the finance and the business and the experiences thing are all interdependent, and therefore you might find that if you're going to go off and spend £20,000 on running the North Pole Marathon, then that's going to have an impact on the financial goals that you have. Or if your desire to go and visit the Milford Sound in New Zealand is something you don't want to do with the kids, then that post-it note will be moved until after the kids have left home or something like that. I hope that makes sense. Okay, and so what hopefully we've shown is that you can take those long-term plans and bring them back into a next year goals. And the metaphor, I think, that most adequately applies in terms of understanding, therefore, what you're doing is, if you can imagine you're going to be driving from here to the southern tip of Italy, that's a more than one day drive. So what you would probably do is have an idea of how far you would get on day 1, day 2, day 3, whatever it might be, and that's kind of equivalent to the year. So there's a big picture. We want to get to this point by the end of that day. You might even have booked a hotel to stay in on your drive. And then you'd probably use your GPS or your sat-nav to give you the navigation of the actual route that you would be taking, which would be your interim yearly plan. So that would say, well, we've chunked it down into one year, and then we know broadly what we're going to be doing in that year. But then when you're driving, you would actually have that limited field of view, which obviously in this case is driving at night. So therefore, although you can only see the distance that's visible in the headlights, you do know what's coming further down the track. And as you move forward, then obviously your headlights move forward with you, and you can see that bit further. And to me, that's what running a business is like, is that we can only ever see what's immediately in front of us. Anything else is just projection. But as we move through that bit that's right in our field of view, then we can review things and plan differently for the next bit that comes into view. But overarching all of that, we have got the sat-nav navigation stuff that says broadly, this is the direction that we're going to be taking. So in terms of breaking down that journey, effectively what you've been through is asking, well, where are we going? We have asked ourselves, what do we want to be true in a broad range of things in life, including the business, and then a date in the future. And then if you know where you are now, which hopefully you do, then what you're looking at is what's in between. So if this is true now and we want something else to be true in a few years' time, what is it that needs to change in between? And so you start to identify the things that need to happen, the things that need to be done, both within the business and elsewhere. And then you can break that down into particular milestones. So I talked about kind of annual time intervals, and so therefore annual targets obviously become apparent. So you might say that by the end of 2018 I want to be at this particular point, which could be a turnover figure or whatever. You can also have other milestones of turnover or profit, because obviously profit's the thing that allows you to do things in life, not just the turnover. So therefore you might say when we get to 500,000 or 1 million or 100,000, then this is a point at which we can A, celebrate, and B, kind of reflect and see whether the strategy is still working. Or it could be, depending on the business, it could be that some milestones of your footprint. So retailers often talk in terms of the number of stores. I was driving here today and hearing that Toys R Us are closing 25 stores, so they're going backwards in terms of their location milestones, presumably in order to improve their profit milestones. So by doing that and breaking that down into those shorter term milestones, that's then how you can see what you can see in your headlights. So you now know that I don't need to worry about what's going to happen in 2019. I can focus on what I need to do on 2018, and I can actually see that the first quarter of 2018 I'm going to be doing X, Y, and Z. So therefore that's just the bit that's in my immediate headlights. And in my experience, that's much easier then to be able to direct oneself in terms of activity, or to direct your team in terms of activity. And that's what makes the difference between just having a plan and being able to execute on the plan. So this is a graphic taken from a very good book called The Slight Edge by a guy called Jeff Olson. And the fundamental principle behind this graphic is the law of compounding, which is that little things done early make big differences in the future. So if you save a little bit of money from the day you're 20, then you're going to have a much bigger pension pot than if you start when you're 40, just because those little bits build up over time, especially if you've got compounded interest in the case of savings. And so what Jeff Olson says, and I tend to agree, is just that the slight edge is just about doing daily things early on and maintaining them, that where you drop bad habits, what he calls simple errors in judgment, and you start good habits, what he calls simple disciplines. And so therefore you're just contributing those daily things, and the obvious things like not smoking or making 3 sales calls a day, those kind of things are just simple daily activities that you can do that will ultimately add up to a significant impact over time. So once you know what's in your headlights and what those short-term milestones are, it ought to become more apparent what those simple disciplines to either do or stop doing are going to be that are going to take you towards those goals. Excuse me. And hopefully, because if you've got that long-term vision, the thing that's the equivalent of driving to the southern tip of Italy, then you've got the ability to say, well, that's why I need to do this today. So on those days when it's difficult to get yourself up and make those sales calls or go for a run or whatever it might be, you've got the bigger picture to give you the motivation to say, well, this is what's important. Excuse me. And so just to reiterate that, that's a quote from Jeff Olson's book, that it's the little productive actions that are repeated consistently over time. So normally, business success doesn't come from massive, groundbreaking activity on any one day. It's lots of little things that just add up: improvements in quality, attention to the numbers, making sales calls, managing people, developing infrastructure. Those kind of things just build up over time, and then you wake up and realize that you've got a business that's big, successful, and is taking you in the right direction. And certainly I had that experience outside of business life where I started running or jogging in 2001, and I could just about do 10 minutes. It was about a mile, and I just tried to do a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more over a period of time, and within 4 years I was running for 5 hours, which was actually a marathon distance, and I completed the Abingdon Marathon. And so it's just that little bit of building up over time. So I didn't go from running nothing to running 26 miles. I just built it up over time, and my body responded and was more able to do the distance. And similarly within businesses, I've got a client where I remember 5 years ago we had a meeting, and they were complaining that they had a sales target of £8,000 a month for new business, and they never ever hit it. And now if they do less than £20,000 a month, then they would be bitterly disappointed. And that didn't happen overnight, but that just happened by daily putting stuff in place that just increased their abilities and their expectations and their infrastructure. And the company's now 2 or 3 times bigger than it was when we started working 5-6 years ago. So it just grows bit by bit by bit. Now, you've probably already picked up that I'm a huge fan of plans and having things kind of written down and drawn out and thinking about the future. It's really worked for me. It's allowed me to do lots of exciting things in my life and have some successful businesses, but I've also seen it time and time again with clients. However, having a plan isn't the same as it actually happening. And a famous quote from a German military philosopher is that no battle plan ever survives first contact with the enemy. So in the multivariate, very complex world of running a small business, we have to recognize that sometimes what we plan and what happens aren't necessarily the same thing. And I experienced that on one level with the salmon not turning up in Canada, but I've obviously experienced that many times over with business planning, where you think your sales are going to be something, and then the market changes or clients shift or whatever, and so therefore you have to react. And the very wise philosopher, my wife, Mrs. Butler, is very keen always to tell me that just because it's in a spreadsheet, it doesn't make it reality. So just because you've set something out in Excel that says our sales are going to grow by this, 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 and this, doesn't mean it's going to happen. You have to execute on the plan and do the day-to-day stuff that's actually going to make it happen. And my favourite quote when it comes to having a plan comes from the boxer Mike Tyson, which is that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And the reality is that stuff happens in business, good and bad. We have clients that go bust. We have competitors that enter the market and undercut us. You can be very happily driving a London taxi cab, and then Uber appears and completely turns things on its head. And we have to be conscious of that, and we have to be able to react. And so therefore an important part of turning a business plan into success is being able to read those signs and have the data in terms of your progress and be able to correct course. So from a daily point of view, if today you didn't make your 3 sales calls, then that's okay. You've got tomorrow as an opportunity to start again. And so you can correct course on a daily basis and attempt to improve things. For my sins, I'm a cricket fan, and so England are playing Australia at the moment and have done phenomenally badly. And then you get a change of innings, and they have the ability to start again. They obviously had some kind of team talk, and they've come out fighting and are doing marginally better than the bad way that they were doing before. Not yet good enough, but we're getting there. And in a business context, you can review that daily or personally, and you can review that weekly with members of your team, or you can review that monthly in terms of the business. So the work that Chapman, Robertson and Moore do of coming and saying, what do we intend to have happen in terms of sales and in terms of overheads and costs, and therefore what do we intend to have happen in profitability? Did it happen? If it didn't happen, why not? What did we do? What didn't we do? What worked? What didn't? What's changing in the marketplace? And then you can change course. So you can react to the things that are going on. For most small businesses, monthly is probably often enough. I've got friends who are in sort of large retail and that they look at things daily. It depends on your business. I think if you wait till quarterly, then it's already kind of old history, and so therefore there's much less opportunity to react. But kind of monthly gives you the ability to change course and do something. And obviously, quarterly or annually, you'll then want to look at your medium and long-term goals and say, well, actually, do I still want those same things? Do I want to increase my expectations, or do I want to reduce my expectations? Do I want something different from the business? Is there a new thing that we should be heading to, either because the market has changed or because a new opportunity has opened up? All these kind of things. So a classic example would be if you're not planning to make an acquisition, then having capital to be able to do so is not relevant. But if suddenly actually you see that there's consolidation within your sector and there are people coming up for sale that might be good for you to purchase, you might need to consider building a war chest to be able to make those kind of acquisitions, and that might change your goals in terms of retaining profits or borrowings and so on. So just having the time and the management attention to be able to step back and say, are we on plan? Are we still heading in the right direction? Is very, very important. Okay, so I said that I was going to talk about how you can bring your team with you for those of you who are not on business in your own and have others with you. And in my experience, anyone, even if they're on their own in the business, aren't truly on their own in the business, because we have suppliers and we have people that we use for our website or our graphic design or our printing or our accountants or whatever. So therefore, even if there's just you in the business, like there is for me now, I still have a group of people that I'm trying to bring along with me and have support me. So therefore it can be useful to have something to share, to manage yourself by, but also to share with them to inspire them. So I just want to talk you through one of the resources that we have in the book that is kind of designed to fulfill that purpose. So this is effectively a one-page business plan. So I'm a great believer in brevity and in ease of reference, and so this is a way of converting the circles and post-its diagram that we had before into something that can be really easily summarized for someone. So just to talk you through how this works, and then I'll give you a worked example just to see what it might mean for individual businesses. So on your top left, you've got the purpose. So that's the kind of reason why you get out of bed in the morning. That's why the business exists. That's the change that you're trying to see in the world. And it can be useful, particularly for a team member, to understand the why behind the business. Most often they're not that motivated by making the owner rich, but they might be motivated by changing the face of graphic design or saving clients money or whatever it might be. The right-hand cloud at the top is then the vision, which is where you're able to articulate some of that, the business side of your 2025 goalposts. To say, we want to be in this place by this point, and these are the things that we want to be true, so that people have an idea of the direction they're heading. That's the long-term thing. Outside of the headlights, that's the where kind of the GPS type thing. You then have in the kind of marble grey bit, you have the values. So that's just a reminder of, we want to achieve these things, but we want to do it in a certain way. So therefore, we're going to be true to these values. And then you come down into the objectives for the year, 3 or 4 things that people can really identify with, just to say that we want to hit X turnover, open 3 locations, whatever it might be. No more than 3 or 4, because people struggle to remember them. And then in order to achieve those objectives, these are our priorities, with a specific what statement that says this is what we want to do, this is when we want to do it by, and then this is the person who's responsible for championing it. They don't have to do everything, but they're the person that's responsible for advancing it. So just to give you a kind of worked example, which does come from someone I worked with in the past, but it's been kind of manipulated so that it's less easy for you to identify who they are or anything kind of personal about it, just to illustrate the point. So they were a fire safety business. They did fire risk assessments and sort of provided fire alarms and fire extinguishers and stuff. So their purpose was no lives lost or property damage due to fire. So that was the thing that was the kind of bread and butter for them. That's why they came to work in the morning. They wanted to protect people from the dangers of fire. And I've changed this dates and things to make it more relevant, but so by a point in the future, 2022, they wanted a turnover of a couple of million across 3 offices with a 20% net profit from that 2 million, so that they had growing reserves in order to be able to invest in growth, either more offices or acquisition or whatever it would be. So that was a kind of really clear, everybody in the business could understand one sentence that said this is where we're heading, and we knew why, because it was about saving property or lives. For them, they had 3 simple values that they wanted to articulate. So the way in which they wanted to be as a business, that they wanted to be very professional, they wanted to be approachable, and excellence was very important. And excellence obviously was a major contributor to the no lives lost, because there was no room for error. So in that context, they might have objectives for the year which look like this. We're not yet at the 2 million, so therefore we want to make our turnover hit 1 million. We want our business operating systems ready to be duplicated, because we want to be able to move from having one office to another. And then the other objective is in the last quarter of the year, Q4, to say we're going to open our second office. So you've got 3 really clear objectives that are milestones on the way to that overall vision. How are they going to achieve that? Well, so first priority is to grow sales. So there might be 2 or 3 things that they're going to do that are going to contribute towards that growth in sales. So in this case, a cold call campaign, some cross-selling, and a new salesperson. And then each of those will be implemented in certain quarters. So in this case, with the cold call campaign in Q1, the cross-selling campaign in Q2, and then recruit a new salesperson ready for the new office in Q3. And Dave is the sales manager, so he's the person responsible for implementing those and kind of accounting, being held accountable for it. In terms of making the systems ready for duplication, therefore they wanted an operations manual to be created, so every process documented, tested, and everybody in the business trained on how to use it. And that's going to be done by mid-year, and Susan's the person who's responsible for that quality management and operation manual process, so therefore she's identified as the person who's going to be accountable for delivering that priority. In order to grow, they're going to need to recruit, so therefore they wanted a new salesperson, as already identified, and then the new office is going to need an office manager and an office administrator and an engineer, and so therefore different people are going to be responsible at different times during the year for getting those people into post in order to allow it to happen. And then in terms of finding the office, then the MD, Matt, is going to coordinate all of that, but they need to find the premises, negotiate a lease, fit it out and get it ready for work, put in the IT and other infrastructure, and then obviously move in ready for the opening at the end of the year. So hopefully that just shows how you can take something in the future, like the 2022 2 million goal, break that down into a milestone for 2018, which is turnover related and systems related and so on, and then you can break that down into individual actions. And so this business now would have a really clear thing to sit there at the end of each quarter and say, have we delivered on the things that we've said that were going to happen within this plan? You could have your objectives, a sheet like this, just for 1 quarter or just for 1 month, and I've seen businesses use something like this and have one for the business, and then they cascade it down for constituent parts of the business, different departments or locations and so on. Whatever really works for you. The key thing is that each individual within the business sees something like this that explains what it is they're doing and how what they do contributes to what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's how you bring your team with you, because it gives people context, they realise what role they're in. That is always harder to do with more blue-collar workers, so people who are kind of on admin or working on the shop floor. That's always harder to get them engaged in something bigger like this than people who are perhaps more driven and heading towards management and things. But it still has a place, and obviously it's just for each business you would pick the level to which you shared that stuff. I hope that makes sense. So just to summarise what we've been through over the last 40 minutes, I have a huge passion that people should live life purposefully, to actually take the time to stop, consider what living the dream means, and actually then start to make it happen. There is no time better than the present to start that. Obviously we've got the change of year coming very soon, so you've got a 3-4 weeks to start to think about what it is you want to do, and then you can come back in the new year with the momentum to really make it happen. Very definitely I would start with the long-term future plans and look to how you're going to build to those, because that generally makes one more expansive, more imaginative, rather than just thinking, well, what am I doing now and what do I want to change immediately? Think about the big picture stuff, because you're much more likely then to make it happen. Even if it's 5-10 years away and seems impossible now, by doing little things now you can start to build towards that. Be ready to course correct and revise your plan if you do get punched in the mouth. So build into your diary the opportunity to take time to reflect, have management meetings or time yourself to go away and get out of the day-to-day activity of the business and just think about what's going on and whether you're still heading in the right direction, whether you need to speed up, slow down, etc. And really you don't need the detail in the far future, you just really need the detail in the next year or next quarter, and then that should translate into what is it that I need to do this week or today or whatever. So personally I know what I want to achieve in terms of my business for the year, and I know that translates into a weekly sales figure that I need to be hitting, and if I'm not hitting that figure, then I know that means I need to be doing more sales activity, just as an example. So you get that kind of information broken down bit by bit by bit. So what does all this mean? We've all wasted our time this afternoon if you've just enjoyed listening to me and nothing changes. So therefore I do invite you to take time to think about that. Excuse me. This is just a reference to the fact that sometimes the salmon don't turn up and we don't always get what's over there. So therefore do consider the value of what you already have, and don't always be striving for kind of unobtainable stuff, but just enjoy what you've got too, just in case the unexpected happens, and it'd be good to enjoy what you already have. And so therefore do schedule, we'll be finished before the top of the hour, so therefore find the opportunity to take a few minutes before your next meeting or whatever, just to either start to think about it or schedule some time to think about it, where you're going to do something differently as a result in the next week and the next month to get you ready for that 2018. Very definitely the thing to do is to build time into your schedule, to be thinking as an entrepreneur and to be planning what's going to happen. So please, before we finish today, think about that. Before I go, one minor plug. I've referred repeatedly to a book and used a couple of examples. This is a book that I published with my former business partner, Celia. So it's available from my website, and the web address is at the bottom. My mum thinks it's the best book ever written, but that's because she's a proud mum. So, but it might be useful for you. If not, feel free to go to the website. You can contact me, and we can have a conversation about any of the stuff that we've talked about today. And before I go, I'd always say dare to dream. I would love for you not to wake up in 20 years and say, I wish I had. I'd far rather that you stopped, had a coffee, thought about it, and actually started to make it happen, so that you say, I'm glad I did, rather than I wish I had. Do plan. Ask yourself what you want, and dare to dream. It's amazing what you can achieve if you just put your mind to it. I think you need a plan in order to get there, but nothing happens just because it's in a spreadsheet. So don't just plan, do take action. And then very finally, as my mother always taught me, Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for Chapman Robinson Moore for the opportunity to talk to you this afternoon. And I genuinely really hope it has been useful for you and it helps you live the dream.
Super. Thank you, James. Much appreciated. As always, fantastic content and always thought-provoking. And for me, James is someone as a coach who's been around for many years, not just someone who's come in quickly with a textbook of theory. And that's just basically proven through the success he's had with his clients and the testimonials we've seen from his clients. The one thing for me that every time I listen to James's content just highlights to me that link between the business and the personal goals. And for many of us, our income is predominantly our business, so therefore our business needs to achieve those goals to be able to deliver our personal goals. And a little bit like James said, the personal goals can be achieved with the business being its vehicle. So I'm just going to hand it over quickly to you to see if you have any questions. In the chat box, you can see to the right-hand side, if you've got any questions, if you'd like to type anything in there. And whilst we've still got James with us, we could ask him a question.